民主甲极权的对决，吼，就是讲we all know all know today's topic is duel between the democracy and autocracy, right? So this is the topic, and I think you can see in the program. Let's start with a few. I still want to start with Mr. Bolton, okay? I think that, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Bolton for his strong support to Taiwan over so many years. And I want to thank you for your advice you delivered today. They are very concise and very well thought. We all appreciate that. We all agree that the threat of China, right, autocracy country like China, is especially now, is worse than ever, right? After the war with Ukraine, I think between the two camps, it is very, very much made people aware of the whole thing, right? So you mentioned about symbolism. I think that's what we at FAPA, we talk a lot, right? We always said symbolism and substance. We Taiwanese a lot of time, we feel, and it's to Taiwan, symbolism is also a substance. So to balance that, I want to ask you a question. It's like you said strength is not provocative. Weakness is, right? So we know China will be provocated whatever you do. So why not, especially when we tell this this country now have official relations with Taiwan right now, don't break that, maintain that. U.S. have a Taipei Act, right? But U.S. and Taiwan doesn't have anything, doesn't have official diplomatic relations. How can you then persuade other people to do this, even more than you do, right? So that is the question. So how can U.S. be moving to the direction of establishing diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and what are your suggestions?
Well, is this on? Yes, okay. As I said, I have been in favor of full diplomatic relations for a long time. And I think the fundamental reason for that is that any country's foreign policy should rest in reality. And the reality is that Taiwan meets every customary international law definition of statehood. Has a defined population, a defined territory, it carries on all the necessary functions of government. It's a state. Now, you can argue, does that mean it's an independent state? Well, I would say, yes, of course it is. Because if you're a state, by definition, you're independent. So saying independent state is a little bit like saying in American English, pizza pie. Pizza is a pie. So you can call it a pie if you want to, but it's still the same thing. That's why that's my point about not getting hung up. But political reality is often expressed in ways that are important too. And so full diplomatic recognition would signal that the United States felt that Taiwan was not just meeting the definitions of statehood, but was legitimate, had a legitimate government. What's the definition of legitimacy? The only acceptable definition of legitimacy for a government is the will of the people. Throughout history, there have been countless other bases of legitimacy, and some countries in the world still have them. But for us and for Taiwan, legitimacy is consent of the governed. And that's a very powerful point. It is a fact as well, though, that there are other states in the world that have been shunned by their neighbors and didn't get the advantage of diplomatic recognition. And the example I would give to Taiwan of how to behave in that circumstance is Israel. In 1975, under pressure from the Soviet Union, the Communist bloc, the non-aligned movement, passed a General Assembly resolution that declared that Zionism was a form of racism. As Zionism is the ideology of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people. And so the UN delegitimized in their minds the very basis of Israel's existence. But throughout the entire period, Israel kept contact with, kept talking to, kept working with many governments that denied that it even existed. They did it through their intelligence services. They had close relations with the Shah of Iran before the Shah was overthrown. They've had close relations with many of the oil-producing Gulf monarchies. They worked in anti-terrorist measures with many other governments. They didn't like the fact these governments didn't recognize them, but they achieved concrete objectives. And now we see in the Abraham Accords, the United Arab Emirates have recognized Israel, Bahrain has recognized Israel, other Arab states have recognized Israel. Diplomatic recognition will come, but the work that preceded that was all done without full diplomatic recognition. So is it desirable? Should you want it? Do you deserve it? Yes. Can you operate without it? Yes, and you should.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, okay, then we will just pause for this and then move on to other panelists. And I apologize, I didn't introduce all the panelists first, but I think we'll follow this way because I think Mr. John Bolton has been introduced already. And so I will introduce the panel one by one and give them the 15 minutes. So the next panelist is 立委罗志正。Let's give a hand. Thank you. 罗立伟他是政治大学外交系毕业，在美国的 UCLA 拿到博士，目前是立法委员，也是民进党的政策会主委。伊捌做过真侪部分嘛，伫东吴大学伊政治系的系主任，台湾政治学会秘书长，台湾社的秘书长，民进党新北市党部的主委。搁一个叫做拯救台湾行动联盟的发言人。That's a lot. I think he has a lot more. I think, and let's give him the floor. Give him a.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the organizers, World Taiwanese Congress and Taiwan National Alliance for hosting this event. Because we have people who have traveled from near and from halfway across the world. So let me do it in a bilingual way. 先感谢两位主办单位。那因为很多不同的语言背景，所以我用2种语言来跟大家说明一下。I have to apologize for coming late. You know, I didn't make it to your speech in person, but on my way here, I watched the live streaming of your speech. 我很抱歉没办法准时到，因为我地方有一些行程，但我在路上，我全程观看Ambassador Bolton 的演说。I think the speech was very enlightening, very insightful. And I think everybody in Taiwan should watch and listen to your speech very carefully. 我想这个演讲非常的具有启发性，而且非常深入，应该很多人都应该仔细来听这场演讲。And I had a very honored opportunity to talk to you yesterday, and we have a very in-depth discussion about the threats that we are facing and the possible strategies that we can adopt in coping with the threat. 昨天我们在党部有跟Ambassador Bolton 有些对话，所以有一些讨论，所以我很清楚了解台湾跟这个美国之间有什么样的努力可以一起来努力。Okay, I think you point out a very important aspect of China question or China issue. That is the nature of the threat and the types of threat that we are facing, and also the type of relationship we are having with China, and more importantly, the strategy or counter strategies we should adopt in coping with China's threat. 我想他的演讲或他的立场点出一个很重要的几点，第一个是中共的本质是什么，还有威胁的样态是什么，还有我们跟他的关系的本质是什么，而且更重要，我们怎样的策略跟战略去面对这样的威胁。Okay, so I don't have much to add on your very extensive and comprehensive analysis, but I just want to point out some specific questions that we are facing right now. 我没有太多可以加在他的分析上面的东西，但是我可以来谈一些我认为比较具体的一些问题，我们要面对的问题。Okay, first of all, the term status quo is misleading. It's not static, it's dynamic. More importantly, the so-called status quo has been challenged and changed. 第一个现状，英文叫 status quo， 是有误导性的概念。因为它不是静态的，不是 static， 它是动态的。那更糟糕的是，这个所谓现状已经被挑战了，而且被改变了。Okay, that's why some people in the States or even in China use the term new normal. 这也是为什么有些人开始用一个字眼叫做新常态。But it's a abnormal situation. 我必须要讲，这个新常态是一个不常态，甚至不正常的关系。So, looking back.The status quo we had 10 years ago and now it's quite different. And looking to the future, the so-called status quo 10 years from now, I think will be very different from what we have today. 所以这个现状现在跟10年前比较，或未来10年比较，会有很大的变化。And what happened? 所以这个问题是什么 ？First of all, we are facing a different China. 我们面对是一个不同的中国。The threat we are facing is not a black and white threat. It's a very mixed.And very subtle and sophisticated threats that we are facing. 所以面对是一个非常不是一个黑白的一个威胁，是一个非常精密的、细致的，而且是每天在发生的威胁。It's a daily threat we are facing right now. And I want to point out 4 important strategies or tactics that China or the PRC is adopting in dealing with the so-called Taiwan problem or Taiwan issue. 所以让我们点出4点中国采用的策略来改变这个现状。First of all, salami approach， 就是所谓切香肠式的一个做法。In other words, China has been changing the situation on a daily basis. For instance, China's fighter jets has been, patrolling, using the term, or circling Taiwan on a daily basis, but changing their activities every day. 所以第一个，他们采用的这种切香肠的方式，不断的改变现状，而且每天在改变。最明显的就是中国的军机或一些军事行动在这边的一个改变。So the question for us, and I want to ask Ambassador Bolton is, should we push back? 所以我的问题是，他们不断的改变，而且往前台湾推，我们第一个挑战跟问题是，我们把它推回去嘛 ？Or should we say that enough is enough? That's our red line. But the thing is, if you draw the red line, if China crosses it, how should we respond? 所以我们的问题是，我们的挑战是，我们要画红线吗？如果中国跨越这个红线之后，我们的问题是，我们要把它推回去。But what if we don't react, and then we keep pushing it? So this kind of salami approach is a very difficult task we are facing right now. 所以这种切香肠式的做法是一个我们很难面对的问题。Because if we decided to push back, or draw the red line and push back, then there's a risk of escalating the situation into a conflict, or at least a tension. 所以我们第一个挑战是，如果我们要决定把它推回去，但问题是出现了，我们有办法再推回去海峡中线吗？一旦推回去之后，有一个很大的风险，这就是冲突，甚至是战争。So, I want to borrow your wisdom and tell us what can we do, and what should we do? That's my first question. Sorry. 所以第一个问题是想说，我们应该怎么办 ？The second question is, the second approach that China has been adopting is the gray zone tactics. 第二个挑战，台湾面对的是中国采用的这个所谓的灰色地带做法。中国现在不断用各种灰色地带做法来改变这个现状。Okay, let me give you a very good example. The so-called military drills simulating blockade of Taiwan. 所以第二个策略就是所谓的用灰色地带的做法。我举个例子，就中国模拟了对台湾的封锁。Last August, when Speaker Pelosi was here. So do we see that as a gray zone tactics? Or should we consider that an act of war? Last year, 5 spots, 5 places. How about this year? 7. And next year, 8, 10, 20. So at what point should we consider that an act of war and then respond. 所以这种灰色地带 you know, when we call it gray zone tactics, we in some way justify their action. Right? Because we don't see that as an act of provocation or even an act of war. 当我们把它称为灰色地带的时候，我们某角度是合理化它的作为，因为它不是一个战争，它不是一个挑战，这样对吗？ So my second question is, how should we counter that kind of gray zone tactics? Or how should the U.S. react to that kind of gray zone tactics? So that will be my second question. The third question is influence operation. 中国的影响力作战 China's influence operation against Taiwan, in Taiwan and outside Taiwan, right? So they have been trying to reach out to different sectors in Taiwan society, religious groups, agriculture, farmers, academia and so on. And they try to buy them, threaten them, or whatever. They are trying to win, they want to influence the domestic politics in Taiwan. But Taiwan is a free and open society. So we are in some way vulnerable to that kind of threat. So how should we deal with it? And how can the U.S. can help us to cope with that kind of challenge? 第三个威胁就是影响力作战。台湾是一个自由、开放、民主的社会，可是中国很容易去操纵台湾内部的民意，包括什么学术界啦、宗教界啦，然后甚至是一般的民众、农民等等。可是台湾是一个民主社会，很难限制这样的行为。那我们该怎么处理 ？And I have to assure you that, what happens in Taiwan may be happening or is happening in other countries as well. So what should we do? Let me give a very good example. Now we talk about the overseas Chinese police service station, right? New York DS office just, indicted 2 Chinese Americans who work for the Chinese police authorities to monitor the overseas Chinese. So they are using our democracy to undermine our democracy, to censor the speeches or activities of those overseas Chinese. How should we deal with it? I think the threat we are facing is more serious than you are facing in the States. 比方说最明显的，中国的海外警察服务，最近纽约不是传出来，那个纽约的地检逮捕了2名美国公民，他帮中国的警察单位做事，来动员去抗议蔡英文总统或者监督海外的侨胞，那我们怎么办 ？OK， 那是第三个问题。So how should we do or work together to deal with that kind of influence operation? My fourth question is China's cognitive warfare. 第四个问题就是所谓的认知作战。Again, Taiwan is a free democracy. We embrace the values of freedom of speech, freedom of media, and so on. But China is using that to weaken, to discredit the government, to discredit the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. So how should we deal with that? 最后一个就是所谓认知作战。中国利用台湾的这种所谓的民主、自由、开放，去弱化政府、弱化美台关系，影响民众的认知。那我们怎么处理 ？Okay, but more importantly, we have a lot of so-called amplifiers, collaborators in Taiwan to help China to disseminate, to spread that kind of false information, wrong information. But again, do we consider that a freedom of speech? Or should we take actions to censor what happens in the cyberspace and so on? So it's a very difficult balancing act for us. 但是台湾是一个民主自由社会，更糟糕的是台湾有一些协作者来帮助中国来处理这些问题。那我们如何处理那些威胁 ？So again, these are the things that are happening in Taiwan on a daily basis. So these threats are real, imminent, and it's happening. It's not just an invasion of China. So, I have questions, but I don't have answers. So I want to ask for your help to provide with some clues for thinking about and thinking through possible strategies we should have. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bolton, might you answer right now, or you want to wait until? Okay. Let me introduce Coen first. Coen Blaauw, right? He's been with FAPA since right? 89. More than 30, how many were? Almost 34 years of his life, right? My goodness, right? He has been with FAPA, with Taiwanese, with Taiwan independence for all his life. So let's give him a big hand, big hand. He is Taiwan Kiansai. Right. When he joined FAPA, right, he said he would not get married before Taiwan become formally independent. And then Irish came, right?
All right.
Irish was voted in the Hill, the newspaper, the prettiest woman in the Capitol Hill. And that's enough, right? So we are happy Irish and Coen got married. Coen has been in FAPA from the early days. He has been he was our executive director, and then we created a FAPA. It's a Formosan Association for Public Relations. That's in U.S. an NGO. You cannot do lobby. You cannot put full-time staff to do lobbying. So we have to create a separate organization. Then Coen moved to that, become executive director for FAPA until now. So Coen Blaauw, you講Coen個未老. I'm stealing all his good terms. He will need to take care of that part. Okay, so so 他真的是在我们台湾独立这个运动历史上真的是很难得的一位。我们有2位荷兰人特别的对我们台湾，另外一位当然是 Garrett， 另外一个台湾竞赛，伊无伫遮吼，但是咱都是特别对伊感谢啦，伊真是咱的真好的一个好朋友，足好的朋友嘛是咱台湾竞赛。即摆咱交互伊 give you the mic. So it's your turn.
Dosha, Chien Dosha, Minze. Yeah, so that's always the problem if somebody has a long introduction, that they take away all these things that I prepared. It's already cancel that. But with Ambassador Bolton on the panel, I'm afraid Chih-Cheng and I will not get any questions. So I'll claim my 7 minutes completely. So warn me if I go over 7 minutes, Susan. Susan, thank you. Chien Dosha. And this is my 3rd time at the WTC, my 3rd time. The first time I was in a panel discussion 3 years ago. Then 2 years ago, I was the keynote speaker. And now I'm back in a panel discussion. So it's probably the end for me. It's my last time, probably. Yeah. Next time, moderator. And it's great to be back in Taiwan. I arrived 3 days ago, and I came over DC, and then Tokyo, and then Taipei. And I noticed that in Washington, D.C., as Ambassador Bolton can attest, everybody drives on the right, in Tokyo on the left, in Taipei both ways, both sides. Is that true? It's true, right? Yeah. No? Oh. And it's also great, all the food here. I've been here 3 days, as I said, and I already gained 5 pounds every day, so 15 total, 15 pounds. And as Minze said, I joined FAPA in 1989, and it's been indeed my lifetime commitment, and I'm proud to see FAPA members here, even, and I like to point out especially John Shea, who's filming me now. John, stand up, and because John is the only FAPA Legend Award receiver ever in Taiwan history. So I'd like to special, and to his wife, Chao-wei, next to him. Yeah, Chao-wei. And we have one staffer here, Chi-Wong. Chi-Wong is a doctor in international law from University of Virginia. So it's always a FAPA family, really. And Thomas Wang, I saw here also in the FAPA jacket. So we stand out in our own FAPA jacket. Last but not least, the the person who pays my salary, because if I don't mention that, then he will be very disappointed. And that's Mark Cow. Mark Long Cow. And yeah, so we were talking about duel between autocracy and democracy, and it's of course very broad, but I would like to take it a little bit more literal, a little bit more factual. You know, this is really, when I joined FAPA in 1989, Taiwan was a terrible authoritarian autocracy. And how did I see that? How did I experience that? And that reminded, you know, when Xiao Bi Kim, we know Xiao Bi Kim, right? The ambassador. And does everybody know she was a FAPA intern? Do you know that? In 1991. And so she was my second intern because I had just started, and she was a FAPA intern. And so ever since, I've said to potential new interns that someday they can become Taiwan ambassador to the United States, just like Xiao Bi Kim. Yes. She was put on the blacklist, right? The Chinese blacklist, fairly recently. And Wu Jiaxie was put on the blacklist. I'm sure people here in the room are put on the blacklist, like Yao Chaowen, of course, and Wu Xiaoming. They're all on the blacklist of China. And I was on the blacklist myself in 1989, from 1989 until 1997. I had joined FAPA in August 1989, and in December I was already in the Taiwanese blacklist. Now it's an honor, but at the time it was a little bit complicated because I wanted to go to Taiwan. I wanted to do speeches. I wanted to do, you know, TV interviews, radio interviews. But now, of course, it's an honor, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised that all of us on the panel are also on the Chinese blacklist as well. Yeah. And so what happened is that I was a young boy, really, I like to believe. I was a young boy in 1989, relatively speaking, and I went to an event at the Heritage Foundation, and the speaker was Taiwan Ambassador Ding Maoxi. Is he still alive? Is he here? Is he not alive anymore? Because then I retract my story. But so what happened is that he did his speech, and at the end of his speech, I went to the front to introduce myself with my little business card, and I stepped up to him and I said, "That was a great speech, Ambassador Ding." And he said, "Oh, that's great. Nice to meet you. What's your name?" And I said, "I'm Blaauw with FAPA." And he walked away. He turned around. Didn't want to shake my hands. He left me stand there. And I thought, is this a diplomat for Taiwan? And you might have heard the name Claiborne Pell. Claiborne Pell was a chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And even before I joined FAPA in July 1989, he had told me, in Washington, you learn to like people you disagree with, and you learn to dislike people you agree with. And I thought that's, Ambassador Bolton, you know, that's important in Washington, D.C., because there are so many people, different side of the aisle, but you can still be friends with them. I have a lot of very conservative friends, and I'm a super liberal, because in Holland we have no Republicans. Everybody's very liberal, so I'm still very liberal. But if somebody says, I want to support Taiwan, I say, yes, please do it. From the all extreme right to the extreme left and anywhere in between. So you cannot be that nasty, I feel, in Washington, D.C. So I had learned that lesson, but Ambassador Ding had never learned that lesson, obviously. A month later, one of the TECRO staff, and it was called CCNAA at the time, remember that? CCNAA, Coordination Council for North American Affairs. TECRO staff was leaving Capitol Hill. He had sent back to Taipei, back to MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he had invited me to his farewell party in a restaurant, the Monocle restaurant on Capitol Hill. So I went there, and you know, a little snow globe of Washington, D.C., and the monument, all very nice, very friendly. And I was standing there at the bar, trying to get a beer, and then Ambassador Ding, my enemy, walked in, And 2 minutes later, there was a staffer, an American guy, came to me and said, Ambassador Ding wants you to leave. Yeah, very, very serious and very, very undiplomatic. And I thought, he's the ambassador, he's the Taiwan ambassador in Washington, D.C. And so he kicked me out of that thing. But it even, I think, it strengthened me in my motivation to work harder for Taiwan independence. Yes. And then a little bit later, I was on the blacklist. I had received a really beautiful fax from Taiwan. And I thought maybe I won a human rights award. But it turned out it was a fax which said, Coen Blaauw, right before we put you on the blacklist in December 1989, you flew to, Tainan from Taipei, and you did a speech, and then you went to Taichung, and you did a radio thing. My whole trip was lined out on that fax and said, and therefore we put you on the blacklist. And who said with honor? You said that, right? That it's an honor today. So that's how I perceive it today. But I was not happy at the time. And then during the Clinton inauguration, Chien was there. Chien, my longtime friend, was in that delegation to come from Taiwan with about 10 people. Chih-Cheng was there too. And we went to all these events during the Clinton inauguration. And there was one party at Techro. And I had rented my tuxedo, first tuxedo. We all went there, taxis, we went there, and everybody came inside. Welcome, Chih-Cheng, welcome, Yang Fa Mei-Ching. And it was my turn, and they said, you're not allowed. You're on the blacklist, the Taiwan blacklist, and this is Taiwanese territory. So you're not allowed to come inside the party. And I said, but Chih-Cheng said, no, if Coen Blaauw cannot go, none of us will go. And I said, no, okay, I don't want to create some sort of international incident. And so I went to the other side of the street at the McDonald's in my tuxedo, and I sat there for about 4 hours with a Happy Meal. And again, it strengthened my resolve to be more assertive for Taiwan and to work harder. I thought, if they care so much, there must be something wrong. These PRC tactics, today's PRC tactics, the KMT already had, of course, as you all know better than I do, in the late 80s when I started work. And I think, so if you think the difference between autocracy and democracy is today, how proud we should be of Taiwan, the new country it has become from these old days. Yes, a lot of stuff is wrong today. People are pessimistic about Taiwan's future, maybe today, but it is really good. We should be really proud. So give yourself a big hand. Yeah. And so, I think it is my 6th minute already, but I believe that I always conclude my speeches that I do for FAPA chapters, and hopefully I can still get in. Somebody can ask me a question, I hope. But what I conclude my stories always that I've been with the Taiwanese for the past 34 years, almost 35 years. I have more Taiwanese friends than American friends. I am from Holland. Holland, you knew that already, maybe. Did Minze mention that? Minze, did you mention that? That I'm from Holland. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. And Holland, Taiwan had a long history together, right? Before my time. Yeah, it's from 1624, 1662. Yeah, so I had nothing to do with that. Just want to make clear, Oh, thank you. Yes, but so, that's why I always, when people ask me, say, why do you work for FAPA? I always say, to do something in return, what my ancestors did in the 17th century. And I also say, I'm an international lawyer myself, and so I always make the point that I can make the case really well that Netherlands should reunify with Taiwan. Yeah, that's why I do this job behind the scenes. If the Chinese claim reunification, which is of course nonsense because Taiwan was never a part of China, but the Dutch can legitimately make the claim because we owned Taiwan, albeit briefly. And so, yeah, more Taiwanese friends than American friends than Dutch friends, and it's really, I love the Taiwanese people. They're really sweet people, love to eat, yeah? Always food, so everything is about food, always. And so they love to eat, and, but I think there's always, as I said, and many of you heard me say it before, but I just want to repeat it here in Taipei, that there's one problem I have with Taiwanese people. And that's that they're always Panelists. Panelists. Yeah, like sorry. Oh no, okay, sorry. I heard it a couple of times. CK Kuo said it a couple of times this morning. And so in Washington, D.C., we say if you put 2 Jewish people in a room, you get 3 opinions. And then I ask the audience, if you put 2 Taiwanese people in a room, how many opinions do you think we get? And, and people say 0 or 1, but we need to be more like the Jewish people. I'm not Jewish, but I mean, we need to be more outspoken, more assertive, more aggressive, more angry. All that nonsense we talked about now already, about these Chinese agents who think we should not trust the United States. What nonsense is that? We should be angry about that. Kick them back to China if they don't like it here. Yes. And so I want the people of Taiwan to be less Panelists. When you go out here, be more active. Go to the street. Talk to your neighbors to do that, so that someday we can all know and realize and celebrate that all of us, 23 million people of Taiwan, we all did something for Taiwan. We all did this together. Making Taiwan a full, normal country, not just an island nation. It's a country. Tosha.
Thank you, Coen. That's great. Let's give all 3 the big hands, and then we'll start more answering. So,
Well, certainly a lot to comment on, but let me deal with the 4 questions in 30 seconds apiece. And let me do it in backward order. The first was about cognitive warfare, and Coen discussed that as well. I think any country is entitled to defend against foreign efforts to influence its public opinion. This is not, in the U.S. we have the First Amendment. I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment. I don't like government interfering with political activity or free speech or freedom of the press. But when a foreign government is trying to influence your public opinion or steal your elections or whatever it might be, that's not the exercise of free speech. That is interference to your Constitution, and you're entitled to take steps against it. We're going through this again in the United States. We've done this over the course of a long time. In the 30s, when Nazis were trying to infiltrate, we passed the thing called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. We have taken steps to preclude foreign money from being used to influence federal elections. We were concerned in the 50s of Soviet efforts to take over Hollywood or to influence Hollywood. Now Congress is debating whether to ban TikTok. And there are many, many other things that we can do to combat what is increasingly understood to be the work of the United Front Work Department and both overt and covert efforts to influence our opinion. And I don't think in Taiwan anybody should be concerned about being criticized for violating anybody's civil liberties when you're acting against a foreign government. People of Taiwan will make up their own mind what they want to do. Some may like it, some may not. But that's not the same as saying foreign governments can come in with these external influence operations. I think on the other side of that, though, any government is entitled to defend its own interest in the international news space. In the Cold War, the United States had very effective mechanisms: Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America. We've still got them, but they're just not what they once were. Very good people work for them. I will agree to a Voice of America interview anytime I've asked, but they're operating under inadequate conditions, inadequate budgets. And after the Cold War, again, people just said, what do we have to worry about? We have a lot to worry about, and we can all do better telling our side of the story. For example, on human rights, let's talk about China's violation of the one country, two systems principle, originally intended for Taiwan. I know all of you know that. And the way they've crushed liberty in Hong Kong, what they've done to Jimmy Lai, and most recently apparently abducted a Taiwanese publisher who has disappeared and hopefully will be released. But that's what they did there. Look at what they did to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang as a form of cultural genocide. Look at the repression of religion like the Catholic Church or Falun Gong. Look at the whole idea of social metrics, where the Chinese state judges how good its citizens are. Are you kidding me? I think if we told the world about how China handles its own population, that would do them more damage than a lot of weapon systems would do. And I think Taiwan is a perfect vehicle to do that. Because there is a functioning democracy here. There is a free press here. I almost got trampled by it a little bit ago. But it's very vigorous, and the human rights balance here isn't even close. Now, on some of the more, sorry, one other thing. In terms of cyber warfare efforts, of which China is a major actor in world affairs, is very dangerous for everybody. You need defense against cyber operations. You also need offense, because the way you build structures of deterrence in cyberspace is to impose cost on the aggressor, just like in any other human domain. And here I would suggest for the Taiwanese government, there is coordination with the U.S. on cyber threats, international political and economic cyber threats. This is a huge area of potential cooperation, because if the Chinese did attack here or in the United States, they would use cyber warfare to try and destroy our communications, cut off our, ruin our infrastructure, cut off transportation, a whole range of things. So cooperation in cyber is very critical. On the more obvious efforts at harassment, the practicing a blockade around the island, as they've now done twice, these aggressive flights in the air, naval operations. These are things that they're probably calibrating to stay below an active war. If they cross over, if they come into Taiwanese territorial waters, if they do things that you're justified in acting about, steps should be taken. But they're trying to be, I think, careful about it now to intimidate, but not to do anything that could cause an actual reaction. I have to say, the United States has set a terrible example for you. Recently, when this Chinese weather balloon, we know it's a weather balloon because they told us it was a weather balloon, right? Was allowed to float across the entire United States. And I mean no disrespect to the people of Alaska, there aren't many up there, and we could have shot it down as it came across our territory into Alaska. That's what we should have done. We didn't do it. Now, I don't know exactly what Beijing intended with that, but they got a lot of intelligence crossing across our country, and we should never let it happen again. I think that this is something, again, this would be a very good area for cooperation between Taiwanese and American military circles to discuss how to handle this. We face this all the time. NATO faces it all the time in the Baltic, in the Black Sea. Again, our reactions haven't been perfect, but these are very dangerous things to allow to go unchallenged. We've seen the same thing with China when they shot the EP3, when they forced the EP3 down at the very beginning of the Bush administration, and they've come very close to causing incidents in other places as well. I think this is another area where, on the diplomatic front, for any country that depends on traffic by sea or by air, their interests are the same as Taiwan's, and they are adverse to China. Nobody wants this kind of threatening behavior. So it's another way to show why Taiwan should be accepted in international organizations, in the International Air Traffic Association, the International Maritime Organization. There are ways to make this point, and bilaterally with a whole range of other countries. Point being, we've talked about the status quo, it is China that's trying to change the status quo. It is China that's trying to create a new normal. It is China that's engaged in provocative behavior. And we should call them out for it every time they do it, and say to other people, you should do it too. The G7 foreign ministers just issued a helpful declaration in that regard. I think that's the first time that they've said anything significant about Taiwan, certainly in a long time. It's one step. It's just one brick in the wall. Keep at it. That's what we have to do. You have to be diligent, and just as diligent, more diligent than the Chinese.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. So I have in front of me about 8 questions, all for Mr. Bolton. Okay, I think I start with the order I received. Okay, the first question from Jolie. I think you kind of people stated you plan to run for U.S. president one day, right? So the question is more like, when you elected the president of the United States, what will be your policies in bolstering the alliance in the East Asian region, both economically and militarily? That's the first question.
Well, thank you. To be clear, I'm considering running for president. Now, I said that to a British TV reporter 3 or 4 months ago, and he immediately reported I was running for president, and that I had announced it on a London TV station. So another Winston Churchill quote, he said, "The British and the Americans are two people separated by a common language." And that's what happened there. Look, I think national security is going to be more of an issue in the 2024 presidential race than it has been in recent years. I think there's good reason for that, and I think the threat from China will be a very, very significant issue. So it's going to be important, I think, to lay the groundwork for further strengthening the relationship between China and Taiwan. I hope that will come out in the course of the campaign.
Thank you. The next question, a little bit related to, yes, yeah. No, so I'm going to read your questions. Okay. So I actually got this kind of related to that. The question is coming from Dr. Chien. I first read it in Mandarin first, so people understand. 竞选期间强调理想主义，是民主人权。当选后执政就会调整，政治现实，又倾向现实主义，欺负在贸易、经济跟军事力量。请问您如何调整平衡这两个？Talking about when you are running in election time, usually people will emphasize in idealism, right? And or okay, sure. Okay.
因为提问单好像是比较简单嘛，我来翻没关系。这个台湾呢，跟西方的民主国家呢，都是共享的基本的价值，像民主、人权。在理论上呢，这些西方国家都会支持，或者是跟台湾有同理心啦。但是事实上，西方国家都是在 经济、贸易的利益上都欺负了，对中国倾斜。那么很多在竞选的期间呢，都是强调这个理想主义，当选以后就调整了他的现实的状况呢，都又采取了这个现实主义。这个现实的政治呢，所有的大概西方的这些政治家在选举的时候呢，都是在两边摇摆了。那么 Mr. Bolton 呢要竞选，我问他说，请教说，他如何在中间调整平衡？这个罗志正跟我翻译很好，我简单说一下好了，好不好？The Taiwan we share the common basic value, just like human right, democracy. Yeah. My question to you, how to balance and adjust the realistic circumstances after you win the election. Almost every American president candidate, Nixon, Carter, and Reagan, the same. 他有上海公报，有建交公报，有817公报，都是现实主义的了。所以我请教，这个是一个问题了。谢谢。
谢谢。
Well, it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask, and I'm not even going to try and defend a number of things American governments have done over the past 40 or 50 years, beginning with what happened at the United Nations in the Nixon administration, what Carter did in 1979. It's a long list of things we've done wrong, and all I can say is that times change, history moves on, and today, after close to 40 years of believing that China had fundamentally changed, beginning with Deng Xiaoping's reforms, would become more democratic, would become a responsible stakeholder internationally, people see that was all wrong, and that there's now an authoritarian government in China that is openly expressing threats around the world. So the answer is that it's not necessarily how you balance idealism and realism. It's what the priorities are of the threats you face. And from Taiwan's point of view, the Chinese threat is now seen in ways it was not perceived before. You could see it clearly here because you were 100 miles away. Just like in the United States, we always understood what it meant to have the Russians in Cuba, which is 90 miles away from Florida. So the times change and people change with it. And I think in a time in Washington when there's huge partisan disagreement, one issue that at least as of now has more bipartisan consensus than anything else is confronting the risk of China. And that's a real opportunity for Taiwan. So, I know it must be grating at times to go back over previous things the U.S. has done that you disagree with, and I'll just repeat what I said in my speech from Winston Churchill: that just don't fall away from us. Don't count us out. We'll get to the right place. I think we're getting there now.
Thank you. I think we'll follow with a related question from the reporter. So the question talk about leaked documents from U.S. intelligence show that Taiwan is vulnerable to China's attack, right? So what's your assessment? That's the first question. And what are the priorities for the U.S. and Taiwan, what they should do within a limited time period? And I think related to that is you mentioned about NATO-like organization. I think you mentioned about maybe having Taiwan be more closely engaged in to be part of it. And I think we really want to see that to be reality. And the related question will be, should U.S. military station in Taiwan?
Well, I won't talk about U.S. intelligence other than to point out what's known publicly is that in the days immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine, they briefed Congress in closed session and basically predicted that Kyiv would fall in a matter of days and the whole country would fall in a matter of weeks. Well, it's 14 months later, and that hasn't happened. So, you know, it's a look at Chinese capabilities, and if you list every asset China has, military asset compared to every military asset Taiwan has, guess who has more military assets? And if everything went well for a Chinese attack, yes, they would win. You know, if Germany attacks Belgium, who will win? If you could go down the list, and that's why the effort has to be to deter the attack, not to convince China that Taiwan would win, but that the cost to China of engaging in hostilities would be so negative that it doesn't become worth it to them. And that's really what my speech was all about. So don't worry about assessments like that because they change with the times. And you know, it's more an incentive to us to do more quickly what we should have been doing years before. I mean, for example, cleaning up this backlog of military sales. It's not anybody's fault. It's maybe the bureaucracy's fault. Maybe that's what it is. But we need to resolve it. We need to speed up the deliveries. The U.S. has a responsibility there because we need more productive capabilities across the board, not just in aiding Taiwan. We're going to run out of time here.
I also collect a couple of questions from the media friends. The first one is the so-called 92 consensus. So what's your take on that? As we know that at some point in time, the U.S. administration sort of supported or even endorsed the 92 consensus. But in recent years, nobody talked about that in the Capitol Hill or even in the White House. But KNT continued to uphold the so-called 92 consensus as a basis for resumption of talks between the two sides. So what's your take on 92 consensus? 九二共识的问题。
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting historical document. And like all interesting historical documents, it was created when there was a reason for it, and when times change, the basis of the relationship has to change. You know, the Shanghai Communique, to go back to an even more fundamental statement from the U.S. point of view, said, and this is almost a quote, "The United States acknowledges that all Chinese on both sides of the strait believe there is but one China and that Taiwan is part of it." Well, I went out to National Chengchi University yesterday because I've watched their polling over 30 years of how people on the island identify themselves, not how anybody else identifies them. And you probably know the shape of those graphs better than I do, but the number of people who identify as Chinese is now down to less than 3%. The number who identifies Taiwanese is, what, 60% or more, and everybody else identifies as Taiwanese Chinese. If there aren't any Chinese on this side of the strait, what difference does the Shanghai Communique make? And anyway, just because Chinese on this side of the strait in 1972 said one thing, that doesn't mean that people can't change their minds in 2023. And when they change their minds, they get a chance to change their relations and commitments that were made before. That's just basic to diplomacy. And people in the United States would say, but, you know, they speak Chinese, they've got a Chinese culture, why not be part of China? And I always say to that, in 1776, people could have said to Americans, you speak English, you look like English, you dress like English. What do you mean you want to be independent? So, you know, I don't, and this goes back to what I said in my talk about not getting hung up on magic words. Fine, 1992 consensus. What's the view in 2023?
Can I add something, moderator? Yep. Sure. So what we tell people on Capitol Hill, members of Congress, is, and I think it's the best sales pitch, to abolish the U.S. one China policy, which is laid down in the three communiques, as Ambassador Bolton pulls out. But the reason why the one China policy needs to go, the US one China policy, even though it only acknowledges Beijing's claim over Taiwan, it doesn't accept it. But even condoning Beijing's claim over Taiwan should not be acceptable to the United States. Imagine if China attacks Taiwan and the United States complains, China will say, yeah, but you knew this since 1972, our claim, and you acknowledged it. So we should have zero tolerance for Chinese Beijing's claim over Taiwan. So I think that's the best sales pitch, to just say, the Cold War is over, enough is enough.
Right. So follow up the question similar to that is more on strategic clarity, right? That ambiguity and clarity. And then the question is, do you believe that the U.S. has been vocal enough about their fixed relations with Taiwan? And is there anything that U.S. can do to be more clear and concise about the relations?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things we could do to be clear about it. I think strategic ambiguity served a purpose for a time because by introducing ambiguity, it left the Chinese uncertain what the reaction would be in Washington and therefore served as a deterrent. But things change, and today the ambiguity may lead them to believe that we would do nothing. So eliminating the ambiguity diminishes the chances for military activity because the only party that's going to initiate activity is Beijing. And I think that's the kind of adaptation to change circumstances that has to inform any sensible policy. If it's not based on reality, it's not going to succeed. That also, I think, should point in the direction of full diplomatic relations or scaling it up or doing a variety of things. I have to give President Biden credit for this. He invited B. Kim Hsiao to attend his inauguration. And I think she's, since 1979, the first Taiwanese ambassador invited to any president's inauguration. That's a step, and more things can be done in that regard.
I think you're probably the last question.
Can I, 10 seconds, okay, please, Minze? I think the way there is a resolution on Capitol Hill, it will not establish diplomatic relations, but it says it's time for U.S.-Taiwan diplomatic relations. It's gaining momentum. But the reason we sell it as a talking point on Capitol Hill is that the United States has diplomatic relations with every country in the world except for 5. Anybody knows any of them? North Korea, Iran, Cuba is established. Anyway, to save time, so Syria, North Korea, Iran, and Bhutan for some reason. So these are 4, and oh yeah, okay. I have to adjust my talking points. I have to edit my talking points. And Taiwan, but Taiwan doesn't belong in that little group of rogue nations. We can do better as the United States. And Minze already pointed that out. Also say there are bills, Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida on Capitol Hill, says, we will punish every country which abolishes its relationship with Taiwan in favor of relations with China. But isn't it a little bit awkward that the United States has no diplomatic relations with Taiwan and says, you cannot do it?
I mean, the last question actually is why, and they are kind of related, right? Why America still oppose Taiwan independence? And then under what condition U.S. and Taiwan can establish the formal diplomatic relations?
Well, getting a new president who believes in establishing diplomatic relations is a good way to start. I announced in London and Taipei. Maybe I'll get to the United States at some point. The fact is that in the State Department, there are a lot of people going back to 1949 that thought that Taiwan was just a kind of leftover impediment to U.S.-Chinese relations, and that they could just get it resolved and put behind, then that would be the solution. It takes a long time to weed that philosophy out. But as I say, as people appreciate the growth of the the menace from China, the anomalies from prior history become more and more apparent. And I think things are moving in the direction of closer relations. But as I say, I think it's more important as a practical matter to have real cooperation, strategic discussions, the military level, at the intelligence level, as well as the diplomatic level. And pragmatically, that is the most important thing of all.
So, okay, great. So I think we only entertain the last question. Okay. So this is actually for Mr. Blaauw. Huh? Right. So it's about time, right? Yeah. 就是请问国外的亲台人士近来很担心中国会侵台，你认为应该如何对他们说明？It's asking about all the pro-Taiwan people in outside of the Taiwan, because they worry about the Chinese attack. What do you think we need to do to tell them about the situation? This is not easy to kind of, I don't know, who can explain this? Chih-Cheng, can you explain a little bit what was your question? Yeah, but it's not very clear. Can you explain a little bit about your question? Okay, Coen, your question.
Dosha. Yeah, it's very sweet that you give me the last, or that you give me a question at all. But, I have given many speeches here and around the United States and here. And it's my belief that Taiwan is no Afghanistan. Taiwan is no Ukraine. There's so many reasons why the United States and the rest of the Western world cannot afford to give up Taiwan. Douglas MacArthur already called Taiwan the unsinkable aircraft carrier. But it would be the United States' worst nightmare if it becomes the Chinese unsinkable aircraft carrier, Taiwan. And I have always used this map here. That is this little map. And it's a little bit bigger, so I hope you can see it. But I always say to members of Congress, and we hand out maps, we say that it's China's ambition to make the whole east coast of China, to put a Pacific fleet there with 20 aircraft carriers, 250 submarines. But unfortunately for the Chinese, and fortunately for us, there's no place to park that fleet, that Pacific fleet. And with that Pacific fleet, they want to power project into the Pacific, to Hawaii and to Guam and Saipan and Tinian, all these islands. But the seabed of Taiwan, the seabed dives down the east coast in Hualien, dives down vertically. So it's the perfect harbor for a Chinese Pacific fleet. And as my mentor and friend William Stanton told me in the past, China doesn't want Taiwan for what it is, but for where it is. They want to take over Taiwan and make the whole east coast of Taiwan one huge Pacific harbor. And that means that the United States in Pearl Harbor needs to build a whole new fleet to counter Chinese expansion. And imagine how expensive that will be for the United States to build a whole new fleet. So as long as we keep Taiwan free and out of China's hands, we will be fine. So that's our theory at FAPA, and that's what we tell members of Congress, why the United States has to stand by Taiwan. And Taiwan is no Afghanistan. It's no Ukraine. Taiwan is Taiwan. Dosha.
Sorry. May I just add a note to that? That is exactly what General MacArthur said on the eve of Korean War. In other words, he didn't say that Taiwan is an unthinkable aircraft carrier and submarine tender, period. No. He said that Taiwan will become an unsinkable aircraft carrier and submarine tender if Formosa falls into the hands of communism. 麦克阿瑟说的说台湾只是一个不成航空母舰跟潜舰基地，就这样而已。他重点是在台湾如果落入共产党手里的话，将会成为一个不成的航空母舰，而且是潜舰基地。In other words, I always believe that the thing that can change the balance of power overnight in the Indo-Pacific is Taiwan falling into the hands of China. 这也是为什么我认为说，唯一有可能改变整个这个区域平衡的，一夜之间改变的，就是台湾掉入中共的手里。Okay, but as I said, we have concerns about war in the Taiwan Strait. You know, I think before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, nobody, some people, only some people, or very few people in Europe thought war was thinkable. You know, 在俄罗斯入侵乌克兰之前，在欧洲几乎没有人认为战争是可能的。Right? So then, look at what happened. So I think it's a wake-up call for a lot of people, not just in Europe, but also in this part of the world, that war is possible and started by an authoritarian regime. 这是为什么？这对我们是好的，因为提醒了很多人，对这样的威权的国家，不要说不可能，是有可能发生在台湾。So it's a wake-up call for all Taiwanese, a lot of people in the region, and everybody around the world. So it's a good thing. It's the other side of the coin. 所以这是一个一体两面的东西。But I have to say, ambiguity is provocative.
Okay,
You know, weakness is provocative, but more important, ambiguity is provocative, because you know that will give leaders in Beijing a second thought as to whether the U.S. will respond. 因为模糊这策略是挑衅的，因为会让北京领导人认为美国有可能不会介入。So that's provocative. So that would be my concluding thoughts.
Ms. Warren, do you want to give final words on this?
Well, just to say that in the next 6 to 9 months, obviously the U.S. is going to be engaged in a presidential election campaign, and then through to November, and it's important, I think, to remember that the Chinese may want to take advantage of confusion or lack of attention in the United States during that campaign, so that steps that the government can take, even though you're going into a presidential election campaign and have an election before we do, you cannot reduce your efforts. In fact, this is a period to step up, because the risk of Chinese action of some kind in that near-term period is high. So that's just a word of the wise here, not to reduce your efforts, if anything, to increase them in the next 15, 16 months. And I just want to say again how honored I am to be here and how grateful for the invitation, and best wishes to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Let's give a big hand. Yes, I think, thank you. I think this is conclude our session here. And we don't have time. Yeah. Thank you. I think we conclude today's session. Thank you.
真多谢哦！咱即马就结束了，咱就去准备午餐。